Hello everyone, welcome to Field Notes, an exploration of functional medicine. I'm Rob Downey, a family practice MD and Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. I'm coming to you from Seaworthy Functional Medicine in Homer, Alaska. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. Today we are fortunate enough to be joined by Randy Hartnell from Vital Choice, which for many, many years has provided the highest quality seafood on the planet to discerning folks who want their food to fuel their body and spirit. Hello, Randy.
Hello, David. Fantastic to be with you today.
Oh, I'm so excited that you gave us your time. I've been really looking forward to this.
Oh, it was really cool.
So I deliberately did kind of a thumbnail sketch of your bio. Would you share with us, you're the founder and CEO of your company, and you've been doing this quite a while, connecting people to sockeye salmon from Alaska and other healthy foods. Would you tell us a little, I suppose if you were a superhero, this would be your origin story, right?
Well, I grew up in Washington State, and when I was going to college, I needed to figure out a way to pay for my tuition, and I made my way to Alaska, got a job on a fishing boat. And I was only going to do that during school, but I fell in love with Alaska and fishing and being out on the water and nature. And so after I graduated, I just continued doing that. Ended up buying my own boat and another boat and another boat, and became a full-time salmon and herring fisherman for the next 20 years. Did that until the early 2000s, when farm salmon was encroaching on our markets and our price was collapsing, and couldn't figure out a way to make a living anymore. I got to the end of the salmon season in Bristol Bay and had caught a lot of fish, but didn't have enough. They weren't worth enough to pay all the bills, so I had to find something else to do. And to make a long story short, that became Vital Choice. I moved from catching fish to marketing fish, and built this e-commerce website, and everybody told me I was crazy, and it turned out to be pretty good timing. And I think, you know, as you know, the Alaskan seafood is so incredibly nutritious. It's got a great story. It's one of the healthiest foods on the planet, bar none. And so I have great raw materials upon which to build the company that's now been going for 20 years.
Wonderful. It's so interesting that a lot of the thought leaders I talk to describe this moment of courage in their business where there might have been some naysayers or people that didn't, your vision was clear, but maybe their perception of your vision, they couldn't see the fullness of its potential or something.
Well, I think desperation had a lot to do with it. Economic need, necessity is the mother of invention, and but honestly, things just kind of fell into place. I happened to see, just things fell into place. The right people, the circumstance. I happened to watch an Omaha Steaks commercial on television. Right, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're a mail order beef company that's been around since the 40s, I believe. And I learned that they were selling tens of millions of dollars of red meat that you can buy in any grocery store over the internet, mail. And I thought, and it's not that healthy for you necessarily, or at least didn't have the reputation for that. And here I had access to one of the healthiest foods, most sustainable foods. You couldn't find wild salmon in any grocery store back then in America, speak of, rarely in restaurants. And in fact, that's still pretty true for most of the country.
Yeah.
So, like I said, had all the pieces in place, just had to put them all together and get the website up and figure out a way to get people to it.
Nice. Well, let's delve into some of the fun stuff since we've got this wonderful opportunity. So when you think about describing now at this point in your journey, why sockeye salmon and other Alaskan seafood is so healthy, how do you summarize that now, Randy?
Well, it's one of the only sort of truly natural, real foods that we still have available to us. You know, wild seafood is something humans have been eating as far back as you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, here 2 or 3 years ago, I visited a place in South Africa called Pinnacle Point. And the significance of this place is that they discovered shellfish middens that dated to 165,000 years ago. Now, when you think about, you know, the Lascaux caves in France are 17,000 years old, roughly, or we've been practicing agriculture, farming for 10 to 12,000 years. These people were gathering and eating seafood at the shoreside 165,000 years ago. And the thing that's especially significant of that, in that is that there was an ice age basically occurring then, and it had driven the population, a very small population of humans to that part of the world. And they believe that those people that were living in that area were progenitors for all of us on Earth today. Now, there was an article in Nature magazine by Curtis Marion that goes into a lot of detail about this. My point is, humans have been eating seafood for a long time. And in fact, there's a pretty good case to be made that it may have played a significant role in the growth of our brains, you know, the development of our,
right,
you know, the modern, who we are today. And then when I was fishing for all those years out on the water, there was just something primal about it. You know, this is an animal, a fish that we've been, that I was catching to feed my tribe, so to speak. And, you know, you can get into the biochemistry of it, the nutritional aspects, the omega-3 fatty acids, all the other sort of brain essential nutrients that seafood and especially salmon have. Thousands and thousands, more than 20, 30,000 studies about omega-3. And wild salmon are one of the very best sources on the planet. Incredible fats that are essential to every cell in our body, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw in one of your interviews that, you know, that you don't tire of eating sockeye, and we don't either. We go dip netting on the Kenai primarily for sockeye, and later in the interview, I think it'd be fun to tell a few stories about that. But what I flashed on just a minute ago is that there's this, I guess it would be body intelligence. When I eat a portion of Alaskan sockeye and some vegetables, I just feel great for hours.
I think there's something to that, and I'm serious. We never get tired of it. I think it has to do with our brain, our body. It just recognizes the nutrient infusion.
Yeah.
And if you're not eating wild seafood, or you're not eating seafood regularly, you're not getting those omega-3 fats that are essential. You know, I've become friends with a lot of people in the lipid science world. It's kind of
course
that not very many people know about, but there are a lot of people who have dedicated their lives to figuring out how these fats work in our bodies. The more you know, just the more remarkable it is.
Yeah.
I would, if I could just recommend a book that is one of my all-time favorites that explains this. It's called The Queen of Fats. The Queen of Fats by Susan Alport, and it's about DHA, this long-chain fat molecule. It's just so incredibly bioactive. I mean, it's constantly mutating into different, and when you think about that in your cells and the fluidity that brings cells and how they're able to, you know, take in nutrients, it's just, it's kind of geeky, but it's amazing. The more you know about it, the more amazing it is.
Well, our audience is interested in this stuff, and I do want to kind of underline and highlight what you shared there, because first and foremost, so many folks, I think that, you know, their sort of entry, as it were, into the value of the omega-3 fatty acids from fish is as an anti-inflammatory, and it's a spectacular anti-inflammatory, that EPA DHA combo. But the way I've described it to folks over years is that the reason that I think omega-3 fatty acid from fish is one of the 5 most important things people do, whether it's food or supplementation or both, is that the cell membranes become more supple. And I know that you care about these omega-3/6 ratios from reviewing your work. And so if we're all defaulted toward a slightly stiffer cell membrane in every cell in the body, and we improve cell membrane suppleness and free up the cell membrane to do its job, well, anytime you improve cellular performance, we're working on such a fundamental level that the benefits are just mind-blowing.
Yes, it's well, one of my doctor friends calls it a head-to-toe nutrient. You know, it's good for every part of the body at every stage of life. And it's just
yeah.
So when a lot of people think of fish as protein, right? But a lot of people that I know in the science world, it's all about the fat.
Yeah, healthy fat.
Types of fats. And as you know, we've just saturated sort of the modern industrial diet with these industrial oils, the omega-6 oils that we're just so out of balance.
Right.
Which is driving a lot of the inflammation that is especially relevant. I mean, it's relevant always, but it's especially relevant now with the COVID pandemic because it's this inflammatory cascade and runaway inflammation, I think, that is doing the most harm to people.
Yeah. Yeah. I just completed a class from the Institute for Functional Medicine in COVID called Resistance, Resilience, and Recovery about the functional medicine dimensions of mitigating this. And all of the experts who drilled down into it on the IFM faculty are saying that the reason this virus is so perfectly positioned to take advantage of Americans is that the majority of them have these silent inflammatory storms brewing already. And so the SARS-CoV-2 virus just comes in and triggers these inflammatory cascades in an already inflamed system. And now it's got cover to do its work because there's just chaos everywhere. And the omega-3 fatty acid in fish quenches that magnificently. So I couldn't agree more.
One physician I know, I was sitting in on his talk, and he referred to omega-3s as the ultimate inflammation modulator.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so nice that it's so fun when it's good for us and it's delicious.
Well, and it's so profoundly, and I know you feel this and everybody in your field feels this, it's just so profoundly frustrated that you don't see this message out there, right?
Yeah.
Out there. So very few people know about it. One of my positions is just trying to get the word out.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing that. And thank you again for taking the time today. And when I changed the business model of my practice, the reason to have a podcast like this was to propagate this information out into, larger concentric rings of awareness kind of for everyone's benefit. You mentioned a minute ago a reference to the resource itself, and I'd really like you to talk to our audience about kind of like the sustainability of oceans and fish, because some people have ethical considerations that we need to hear from you about, like, where their fish comes from. Are they doing it at the expense of the ocean? Are they doing it to help a sustainable fishery?
Sure. That's another wonderful story about Alaskan seafood is many people don't realize it, but Alaska pursued statehood in part to take control of the fisheries away from the federal government that was undermanaged or mismanaging them. So they put a science-based management regime in place, 60 years ago, however long it's been. And so now we can look at the fisheries after all this time under science-based management. And for the most part, they're all doing really well. The Bristol Bay salmon fishery that I used to participate in it's really remarkable. They've had like record runs coming back year after year after year. Now, there are obviously a lot of problems out in the ocean with acidification and climate change and all that, and it's scary, but the Alaskan fisheries are generally doing very well. And I don't know how far into sort of the way that the management operates you want to go, but just an example. I used to fish predominantly in a river. There's 5 main rivers in Bristol Bay, and I used to fish in the Igigik River. And the biologist in charge of that, and each river has a biologist in charge of it, and his objective is to make sure his primary objective, make sure he gets enough fish up that river to sustain the run. Make sure they'll keep coming back. And it's only once he's sure, or he or she are sure that enough fish are coming back, that they will sort of put the green flag down, let the fleet go catch fish. And the river, and each river has a certain amount of habitat, spawning habitat. And so they figured out over the years the optimum number of spawners, fish to let go through. And for this river at the time, it was about 2 million. They wanted to see 2 million fish come back. And they put kids and towers alongside the river with counters, and they have planes flying over counting, and they do test fishing. And so it's a pretty thorough process to make sure that they get an accurate count. Well, one year, I think it was 1995, 20 million fish came back to that river. 20 million salmon. The ocean conditions were optimal. The weather during the spawning year was optimal, and everything all came together to just get this incredible survival rate. Now, you don't want 20 million fish going up a river that can only accommodate 2 million spawners. And so that's called the sustainable harvestable surplus. So we got to catch, and the fleet couldn't even stop them. There were so many. And this is what a lot of people don't understand. One reason that a lot of people go vegetarian or vegan is they think that we're going to fish the oceans out, and one of my favorite things to share, because a lot of people don't realize this, is that salmon only have a 2 to 4 year life cycle. They're coming back to head up that river. It's a death march. They're going to go on, and that's the end of their lives. They've lived there almost in their entire lives as nature intended, and that's what the fishermen take them. So any wild salmon you eat from Alaska has lived almost its entire life as nature intended, and as a result of this incredible successful management regime. And then the other thing I'll say is about 20 years ago, actually, we founded our company based on the promise that we were only going to source sustainable seafood, which was easy because almost all Alaskan seafood is sustainable, if not all of it. And Alaska doesn't have salmon farming, as you know. But there's an organization called the Marine Stewardship Council. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but they were formed. It was a collaboration between Unilever and World Wildlife Fund. Unilever has a lot of fish industry businesses, and so they want to make sure that the fish are around to sustain their business. Of course, World Wildlife Fund has an interest in preserving the marine life. So they put together this organization called Marine Stewardship Council, and essentially what they do is they'll go in and they'll study a fishery. They'll determine, how well managed it is, and sometimes it can take years to go through this process. It's so rigorous, but once they approve that it's being well managed, not overfished, they will put their stamp of approval on it. It'll be Marine Stewardship Council certified. And since then, there's been a lot of interest from the public in wanting sustainable seafood. So there's probably 20 to 30 of these NGOs out there that in some way, shape, or form certify seafood as, from a well-managed fishery. But MSC is widely considered the gold standard, and it's not easy. I mean, you have to really, cross your T's and dot your I's to actually get certified.
Got to earn it.
But the nice thing about that is they've become better known. A lot of consumers pursue it, and what that means is that the fisheries that aren't being well managed, they have an economic incentive to clean up their act. More and more customers are pursuing the certified sustainable fisheries. So now, one thing, this applies to the contamination issue. I mean, a lot of people get their information from the headlines, the newspaper headlines, and the 24-hour news cycle headlines. And the old saying, if it if it bleeds, it leads, or if it's bad news, you know, that sells a lot better than good news. And so, so you will see, you know, oceans will be fished out in 40 years, you know, that kind of thing. Or after Fukushima, it was the entire Pacific Ocean is irradiated, you know, stay away from the seafood. But when you really dig into the science, both of those things, it's not, it's just not valid.
Such good news. It
really is news.
And what good timing for good news, because there's another whole group that is 180 degrees from that saying, would you please give me some good news, right? I need it for my, you know, my spirit and my sense of buoyancy going through the day.
I mean, I don't mean to be Pollyannish here. There are
no, I don't take it that way at all. Just legitimate good news is a solace in this time of chaos.
I read an article recently, you may have seen it, where, okay, the climate's warming, the glaciers are melting, but you know, the thing about salmon is about 10% of a given population. Most of them will go back to their river of origin, but about 10% of them will stray into other rivers. It's just something, a system that nature has programmed into them to make sure if one river fails for some reason, they, and so as these glaciers are melting, there are all kinds of new rivers opening up further north, and the salmon their way into it, and they're repopulating these brand new rivers that weren't there before. So
what a cool piece of information, and it makes so much sense that you know, that Mother Nature hedges her bet. I mean, I'm not the least bit surprised,
you know,
but that is just so cool.
Here in Washington State, we've been taking down dams, old obsolete hydroelectric dams over on the Olympic Peninsula. They took a couple down, and in no time at all, the steelhead and the salmon started finding their way back to those rivers. So it's really another good news story.
Well, one parallel I hadn't anticipated today, but I do want to flag it now that I'm thinking about it. There's these parallel good news stories, and they have to do with what's called plasticity. Or the stress expert Heidi Hanna would say that our goal isn't just resilience. It's not just to bounce back. It's for stress to make us masters of change. And both our nervous system and some of these aquatic ecosystems are capable of these heroic plasticity, you know, return to better, go to new terrain. If we just if we just pull the burdens off a little and give them a little support, boy, they really can reboot in an incredible way.
Resilient. Well, wild salmon have been on the planet in one way, shape, or form for millions and millions of years. And it's true. And the reason that they're so the seafood in general is so healthy in Alaska, it's related to these pictures you and I have behind us. You know,
right.
It's one of the most pristine places on earth, and we haven't put dams on all the rivers, and you know, it's just,
yeah.
I like to encourage people if they love nature, they have to go to Alaska at some point.
Yeah.
It's just
like
these beautiful scenes behind us are just a teeny tiny little portion of the state, which has over 30,000 miles of coastline, most of it, you know, pristine. So great place.
What a privilege.
Yeah.
Well, I think it'd be fun to do a little storytelling today, as I shared with you before we started recording. But just so I don't forget, you alluded to it. Would you drill down into concerns people might have about bioaccumulation of toxins like mercury or persistent organic pollutants?
Well, when we started, I'd been a fisherman for many years. So developing an online business, an e-commerce business, you're really engaged with your customers. And so it didn't take long for us to figure out what our customers' concerns were. And one of the primary concerns was this issue of mercury in seafood. And so we had to get educated about this. And one thing we started doing right away was we would take samples of our fish and send them to a lab and get them tested. And also got to know some of the scientists who, you know, they don't have an agenda. They're not in industry. One of my closest friends is one of the leaders in this whole omega-3 world. He was at NIH. And he came up to our booth one time, and we would have this little chart with a picture of the a chart of the methyl mercury levels in seafood, and he just said this is a non-issue. You shouldn't even be raising the specter, because we look at this. If you look at all the most rigorous studies, there is no relationship between eating seafood and mercury problem. There were two early studies out, one in the New Zealand, and I can't remember the other one right away, but or right offhand. But basically, it's in Denmark. They were studying people eating pilot whale, so a great big long-lived marine mammal that had very high methylmercury levels and whatever else is out there. A lot of times they were eating in a ritual setting where they were eating a lot of it in a short period of time. The other study was in the New Zealand, where they were eating tiger shark, and in both of those they did see higher methylmercury levels. If you look at studies that are more representative of what most of us eat, so one of those was in the Seychelles Islands. Actually, they eat probably 10 to 15 times more seafood than most Americans there. It's called the Seychelles Islands Child Development Study. There's 700 mother-child pairs. Took blood samples of the moms who were while they were pregnant, and saw elevated mercury levels in their blood related to the amount of fish that they were eating. And they fully expected that as these children were born and grew up, that they would see a correlation between neurodevelopmental issues and mom's mercury levels. They've been at it now for at least 30 years. These kids are all grown up, and they had 50 to 60 different endpoints, and they've never found any correlation. In fact, the kids the moms who ate the most fish generally did better. This is looked at over and over again. There's another huge study started about the same time in UK, 14,000 mom-child pairs, looking at the same thing, expected to see the same thing, problems in the moms that ate the most fish. Direct correlation between methylmercury levels and fish consumption. But the question is, what's the impact on the child? And it turned out that the kids born to moms who ate the most fish had as much as a 7.7 higher IQ than born to moms that didn't eat fish. So this was a conclusion of that study, which was similar to the other one, and it was published in The Lancet. And it was advice to pregnant women to avoid seafood actually causes the neurodevelopmental harm that it's intended to prevent. And I have a friend, his name is Barton Seaver. He's written several books about seafood. He's a chef, Harvard fellow. I mean, he's been out there a lot. And I ran into him a couple of years ago at a conference. He said his wife was pregnant about a year earlier, and they went around Boston. They found an OBGYN who was highly recommended to them. And when they went in to see her, the first thing she said was, "You've got to stop eating fish while you're pregnant."
Yeah.
Such bad information. That's advice causing the harm it's intended to prevent. Really, and then this other fellow I know, I think he's in his 90s now, but he's been studying this for 40 years. And he said, all you have to do is look at the Japanese. They think we're crazy for worrying about this because they're eating seafood multiple times a week, if not per day. They have some of the lowest infant mortality, the least amount of these chronic diseases. They're also pretty darn smart. So that was then when they were eating a lot of seafood. Now they've adopted a largely Western diet, and they're starting to
be reflected in.
Anyway, as far as the methylmercury goes, we have looked at this probably as close as anybody. We've submitted samples for years, and we just never. Yeah, it's in there. It's in trace levels, 0.05 parts per million or something, but we've never found any evidence of harm, and we've been looking, and we would have heard about it.
Well, thank you for illuminating that.
I want to just qualify that. Now, there are some very high mercury species, the long-lived apex predator the sharks and the marine mammals and the swordfish.
Mm-hmm.
There's a handful, but
Mm-hmm.
I would direct your audience to the new USDA dietary guidelines, which I know are that a lot of people are critical of those, but they did. I know several of the scientists that were on an advisory council that they assigned the task of digging into the current science and coming back with a recommendation. And
Mm-hmm.
science had to be really sound, solid studies.
Right.
And they came back with, you must raise the recommendation because these nutrients are so important, and most Americans are not getting enough, especially pregnant and nursing women. And I would suggest a website that people can go to learn a lot more about this. It's seafoodnutritionpartnership.org or seafoodnutrition.org. Seafoodnutrition.org, and you can read a lot more about this.
Thank you so much. This is terrific. This is absolutely terrific. Since we're doing a tour de force through all the big topics, just in case our storytelling turns really fun and gets away from us, let's talk about farmed fish. That's the last big topic we definitely better hit today because there's some significant concerns there, right?
So I always want to start off talking about farm fish, aquaculture, as I am not opposed to aquaculture. I think there's a lot of potential. We sell farmed mollusks, mussels, clams, oysters. They're one of the most sustainable, nutritious foods you can eat. It's the farm salmon specifically that is a problem. And
okay.
These are ocean roaming carnivores that have been basically penned up, and they're fed synthetic diets, ever more grain, as opposed to basically with the same thing we're feeding all of our other livestock.
Mm-hmm.
Fish meal is expensive, and then it has the other problem. Years ago, there was a farm salmon had the notoriety of having higher contaminant levels, pretty much dramatically higher contaminant levels than wild salmon. And the reason for that was they were being fed these rendered fish meal pellets, so you could go out and catch a bunch of anchovies and sardines, and if you were eating them for dinner, it would just be the most minute trace of mercury or whatever. But when you start rendering them down and compressing them into pellets, you're also concentrating all those levels of contaminants. And if that becomes 100% of your diet as a farm salmon, you're going to have higher levels. Well, one way to get away from that and also lower the cost of the food is what you're feeding them is to feed them more of these cheap grains, like we're feeding our cows and chickens and pigs and everything. And the problem there, of course, is that those grains don't have omega-3s, they have omega-6s. So you're really changing one of the most important aspects of eating fish.
Sure, because the content of the fish reflects the nature of what they've eaten.
Right. So that's from the nutritional aspect. Difference is one problem or reason people might choose not to eat farm salmon. And then there are the environmental problems. So the nutrient profile of a farm salmon is a lot different than a wild salmon. It's not the sort of real natural food that we've been eating for millennia. It's an industrial sort of distant cousin. But then there are also the environmental aspects. Most of these salmon farms are out in the open ocean, and so all the pollutants and the diseases and the parasites. And here in British Columbia, just north of us here, they've got hundreds of salmon pens. And the problem there is they're right in the migratory path of the wild salmon. So the little smolt that are coming down out of the river go through, they pick up the disease, the parasite, and it's had a real devastating, this is arguable, the industry will argue this, but another little bit of good news is that Canadian government now has acknowledged the science that they really are taking an impact, having a devastating impact on the wild salmon run. So they're shutting, I think they have told all of them they have to have their pens out of the water by this spring. The ones remarkable. So that's good. And that's I think one of the wisest things Alaska has done is ban those. There's the nutritional aspect of farm salmon, and then there's the environmental aspect, and generally it doesn't taste as good.
Yeah. Well, just to prime the pump for a little storytelling, my picture behind me is Harriman Fjord in Prince William Sound, and my son fishes there off of Seiner, and he's a skiff man, which is kind of a dream come true for him. He's a very fishy person. And so when we went and camped there, I guess for the viewer, it'll be on the right side of their screen. That's my tent, about 4 or 5 years ago. And the best tent site was right above a 20-foot cliff. So when we camped there, we joked, watch that first step out the door, it's a doozy. And we saw a humpback whale go by while we were drinking our coffee. And then when I stepped away to make breakfast, I came back and my daughter told me that an sea otter went by with her pups on her tummy. And she was teaching them to swim, so they would drift a few feet away from her and hop back on her tummy. And we kayaked right across the bay to the hidden glacier behind my head, and in the fog and the mist, there were seal pups and otter pups sharing the same ice floes. Mm. And then like 3 days later, they were all gone. The floes had drifted away and you couldn't see the critters. And if you weren't there when it had happened, then you wouldn't have sort of seen this ephemeral moment in wild nature. And so when people are eating Alaskan salmon, it's these almost magically vibrant, incredibly verdant places that produce this, hit that we get, which is so good for our health. And so I guess it's an incredible privilege. I can't think of a better, more reverent word about what we're getting to participate in.
I think all of us, some more than others, of course, feel that bond that we have with nature. There's a documentary, it's called Love Thy Nature, and it just talks about our connection. And the interesting thing, just in recent years now that they're getting, DNA testing is evolving, and, they're discovering that we share 70, 80% of our DNA with fish. And a fair amount with trees, and the interconnectedness that we share with nature. We are nature, right?
Yeah.
In recent millennia that we've seen ourselves as apart from it. And when you get back to Alaska, all the stories that I can think of, they're all connected to some amazing experience that in nature.
Do you have any particular one you want to share that you haven't told in other settings, or that comes to mind today, or do you just have a favorite one that always resurfaces?
One just of a million that comes to mind is, so I'm always trying to convince people, you've got to go to Alaska. It's just so beautiful. And if you could happen to pick some time when the sun's out, it's magic. And so I have a friend who we used to fish together. And when I went off to start Vital Choice, he went and started a charter boat business in Southeast Alaska. And so I've taken different people with me on week-long trips up there. And we leave out of Petersburg and then just cruise around, go to the glaciers and fishing. And it's just, and I've taken some sort of fairly well-known health and wellness influencers up there. And the amazing thing about it is you don't really need to do anything. Nature, they're just slack-jawed most of the time, because this one day, I took a good friend of mine, Doug Bebus. He's one of these lipid scientists that I've come to know, and just a fishing fanatic. He would be out there before any of us had gotten up, and he'd have his line in the water, and then last one to turn in at night. And anyway, he's out there one morning, and we're all out there kind of sleepy-eyed and drinking our coffee, and he's fishing, and he's got something. He's got a big one. And so we all gather around to watch what's coming up. And he's reeling, and it's big fish, and the water is so clear, you can see down in quite a few feet. And we watch, and all of a sudden we see these giant canines coming up, and it's a stellar sea lion. He's hooked a halibut, a big halibut. The stellar sea lion, which was hundreds, what are they, 700-800 pounds?
Yeah.
And he realized that halibut was about to break the water, and he grabbed it and turned around, and off he went. And the fishing reel, zzz, you know, and Dennis, my friend who's a skipper, he'd seen this before, so he had a big knife right there. He just grabbed it and cut Doug's line, and the halibut won that one. I mean, the sea lion won that one. So, and at the end of that trip, the same thing happened with or similar thing happened with a humpback whale. There's a lot of whales up there that time of the year. And one was swimming with a boat and caught his line, and off it went. And you could see the whale with the little orange lure on his back. So it was
literally hooked a whale.
quite an experience for Doug. Anyway, those
oh my gosh.
One other that I always
awesome.
was we used to herring fish, and you would use spotter pilots, and they would go up and look around and tell you where they saw fish. But one day we were shut down, there weren't any fish around, and he said, Randy, let's take a flight. And it was a beautiful night. We're up a couple thousand feet at 70 degrees. This is up near Nome, Norton, South Alaska. And we were just flying over the terrain, and it looked like it could have been a million years BC. It's just so pristine. You're just about ready to see a dinosaur, expect to see a dinosaur. So anyway, I'm just, Alaska is a really special place, and I have countless memories of like that.
Well, thank you so much. I thought about two things while you were talking. I heard a related story from friends and got to see the video of some folks who were out on Kachemak Bay last summer, and a sea otter hopped right up on the transom of their boat, and they thought, well, this is different behavior. And then about 30 seconds later, a pod of killer whales surfaced 15 feet from the boat, and that seawater definitely knew where the high and dry spot was. And I have a friend who, I don't want to use his name without his permission, but he's written a lot about the sustainability and sacredness of salmon. And when I got here 8 years ago, I was all excited to finally be an Alaskan resident so I could go dip netting. And I was advised to get a wetsuit so that I could be farther out in the river than everybody else, you know, right? Now, the person who advised me to do this probably had done it on like, 70-degree days on the Kenai. And I was out on the Kasilof at midnight because that was the only time I could get off from work. And so I was just frozen to the bone, hadn't caught any fish, borrowed a pair of waders, they leaked, grabbed a pair of waders out of my vehicle that leaked. And so I'm like shivering in my vehicles, and my buddies gave me a couple of sockeye each. And then over the next week or two, I got it figured out fishing at night when I could get off work. And I took some to this friend down in the lower 48. And we were chatting. He's like, geez, Rob, it sounds like you really suffered for these salmon, right? Yeah.
It's easy. You just go dip net them out. And I guess in the right time and place, you can do that. But
since then, I've figured it out better. I suppose it's like commercial fishing. You know, the good days are earned by the days where you had to like pay your dues and make all the mistakes.
It's not all roses, that's for sure.
Well, you mentioned if there was one thing you'd like to people to know, it's this omega-6, omega-3 ratio. I don't know if we talked enough about that. Do you want to flag it a little as we close?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, one of the fellows one of the scientists I've met over the years was a fellow now named Bill Lands. He used to publish William E.M. Lands. He's considered one of the fathers of this whole, it's called the Lands equation, but it's just the critical importance of a balance of these omega-3 and omega-6 fats. And what makes me so passionate about it, so driven to tell the story, is I've seen the just dramatic changes in my own family. My wife, years ago, had 3 different chronic health issues. And of course, she would go to the doctor. One was a skin condition, and one was an inflammatory eye condition. And I forget she had really bad reaction to and the pollen and all that. Would just every year when it was pollen season, she would just be in bed for 3 days, which is also an inflammatory, condition. And in the course of this growing our company and getting to know these people and learning about this concept of balancing your omega-3s and omega-6s, we started doing that, and one by one, all these conditions just went away. And the eye one in particular was really painful, and it would pop up whenever there was any kind of stress. And the doctors just, all they would want to do is write a prescription, right, for prednisone. So we were always eating quite a bit of fish, but she started cutting the sixes out, reducing the vegetable oil and the processed foods and whatnot. And that went away. And what was really dramatic was a couple of years after that, our daughter came down with meningitis. And she was away at school in New York. She ended up in the hospital for 2.5 months. We didn't know she was going to make it at all for a while. And it was, the point being, it was one of the most stressful things any parent can go through. And she had none of that. She had the eye thing didn't come up. The skin thing had completely disappeared. And so we had a personal experience with that. Growing up, I had eczema badly. And once I started fishing, that disappeared. I didn't realize till a few years later what the probable explanation for that was. I've never had it, since 30, 40 years now. But so I understand, I believe that this really can, you think of all the billions of dollars that people spend on things that could be solved just by doing this, just by balancing those fats in our bodies. And all we're doing is trying to basically replicate what our natural diet, they were pretty much even. Those two different types of fats were pretty much even in our diets. And now they're, as you well know, if you're eating processed food or anything that's fried in restaurants, you're just, it's all soybean oil. And I'm wondering if you saw that study that came out here a year or two ago, linking America's most widely used cooking oil to 90 or 100 different genetic changes affecting brain. This was a rodent study, but I mean, it's
I didn't see that one. I know that the sort of sobering component again is just that we have hundreds and thousands of studies about the myriad and multifaceted sort of consequences of straying from these simple primal imperatives to eat closer to what our genes are calling for. And again, thankfully, those of us that get turned on to whole food find that it's simpler than we might have envisioned. It's not bogged down with a lot of clutter. There's ways to do it. And it's just super important. It's just right there in front of us. So
one friend I have is Dr. Kate Shanahan, and she's written a couple of fabulous books. One is called Deep Nutrition. She's an MD, and she's convinced that most of our medical ills, non-communicable disease and whatnot, is related to these industrial oils. In fact, she's got one page on her website is called The Hateful Eight. After the movie, these 8 different vegetable oils, corn oils, so on and so forth. If you just get those out of your diet, and they're everywhere, as you know, any processed food pretty much has them because they're so cheap. They're subsidized. They're so cheap. And in fact, she was on a nationwide TV show here a while back, and in fact, I think the clip is on her website, drkate.com. She said, I will stake my reputation. You show me somebody who's been off vegetable oil for 5 years, who has had COVID. I don't think you'll find anybody who has a bad, bad reaction to COVID.
Because they're not inflamed, so the virus has nothing to leverage to hide its tracks and get in and do its thing. Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you're commenting on this. The blog transcription components of this will actually have hyperlinks that people can drill down onto, and the authors and thought leaders and websites you've mentioned. So I want you to know your time translates to, again, the concept propagating out and people learning and doing more. And, you know, I get to meet my tribe every week, which is a great blessing for me because Homer's magical and it's also a little isolated. So you've lit me up for the whole week, and you're going to light a bunch of people up who listened to what we did today.
Just try to keep getting the word out. And I think once people get it, and they can influence the people around them, and slowly but surely, hopefully we'll make a difference. I'm sure we will. Well,
thanks for what you do, Randy, and people be able to check out Vital Choice. They want to, you know, it'll be there in the show notes and stuff. And so just can't thank you enough.
I'll mention is we have a wonderful team of writers that do our a science-based newsletter, free newsletter that we put out. So if you come to our website, vitalchoice.com, and ask to sign up for the newsletter, we won't spam you. It's great content. And,
I was really struck by the richness and diversity of content when I was on Vital Choice getting ready for the podcast.
We sell fantastic seafood, but we're really, in my heart, I'm just so much about education. And
yeah.
Over 1,000 original articles on just about any nutrition topic you could think of. I invite your guests to check that out.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, David. Really a pleasure to be with you today. Really feel like a kindred spirit. So if there's anything I can do, you know, maybe if you'd like to promote something in our newsletter, we could do an interview or something sometime.
Thank you again, Randy. Seaworthy exists for people to overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. Please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review if we've earned it, and going to our website podcast tab for any questions or comments you'd like to share with us. Thanks.